Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
All right. Hey, good morning, everybody. Now, that's a curious concept. Now, for you, is Thursday, October 29th, 2020. Of course, I have had to record this thing ahead of time because I'm out of action today, possibly tomorrow. We'll see what happens. We'll see what happens when it comes to recording something for tomorrow. But so many stories that we've had to lay aside in favor of emergencies along the way that I figured at least we'd have enough stories to get through one, if not 2 days worth of extra recording. So, you know, I figured I would record these things for you. I need that time off. But it's such a hectic time. The election just around the corner, or rather the election day on which we all used to vote, but now we've all voted already. But you know how it is. It's an exciting day. It's the end of the campaign season and the beginning of the process of finding out just who the hell does Donald Trump think won this thing, and what about the rest of the world, and what about the rest of the institutions around the country? Do we all believe that this thing is finished, that he's lost? What is it? What do we find out? Well, I don't know. In an attempt to color our perception of what ought to happen, which is really the chief aim of this show, anyway, or has been to date, I thought I might share a couple of things that I've mentioned or that have fallen by the wayside, like I said. And chief among them, sometimes the very long reads over at the New York Times, the various articles that they have produced having gotten hold of Trump's tax documents, or at least some of them, and what they've been able to puzzle out from them. So I may do them in sort of reverse order based on where they've landed in my pocket here, in the pocket program, that is, not actually landing in my pocket. Nothing's landing in my pocket these days. But I mentioned the other day, Trump's philanthropy was, at that point anyway, the latest installation. Who knows what's happened between now and, quote-unquote, now and then. But Trump's philanthropy, big tax write-offs and claims that don't always add up, was the title of what was then the latest piece. Hidden financial records cast doubt on a number of his charitable commitments and show that most of his giving came from land deals that offset his income. Something, well, I don't know if we knew that much about all the land deals, but certainly we've known for a long time that his claims of philanthropic activity were almost always overstated or made up out of whole cloth. So let's see. This is, I don't know if the whole series has been written by Suzanne Craig, Russ Beutner. I'm guessing Beutner, like the way, Buettner. We don't run into him very often. And Mike McIntyre, whose name is easier to pronounce, but who we also don't run into very often. Let's see what they've got in this installment from October 23rd, 2020. In President Trump's telling, he is a committed philanthropist with strong ties to many charities. If you don't give back, you're never, ever going to be fulfilled in life, he wrote in Trump 101. I guess now we know why he's never been fulfilled. Trump 101, The Way to Success, published at the height of his Apprentice fame. And according to his tax records, he has given back at least $130 million since 2005, his second year as a reality TV star. But the long-hidden tax records obtained by the New York Times show that Mr. Trump did not have to reach into his wallet for most of that giving. The vast bulk of his charitable tax deductions, $119.3 million worth, came from simply agreeing not to develop land. In several cases, after he had shelved development plans. So once I've already decided not to develop something, I will agree with the government not to develop it and reap a tax benefit from it. How wonderful. 3 of the agreements involved what are known as conservation easements, a maneuver popular among wealthy Americans that typically allows a landowner to keep a property's title and receive a tax deduction equal to its appraised value. In the fourth land deal, Mr. Trump donated property for a state park, so that he actually parted with ownership of. The New York Attorney General is investigating whether the appraisals on two of Mr. Trump's easement donations were improperly inflated to win larger tax breaks, according to court filings. Surprise, surprise. Mr. Trump's pronouncements of philanthropic largesse have been broadly discredited by reporting, most notably in the Washington Post, that found he had exaggerated or simply never made an array of claimed contributions. His own charitable foundation shut down in 2018, of course, amid allegations of self-dealing to benefit Mr. Trump, his businesses, and his campaign. But the tax data examined by the Times lends new authority and far greater precision to those findings. The records encompassing his reported philanthropic activity through 2017 reveal not only its exact dimensions, they show that much of his charity has come when he was under duress, facing damage to his reputation, or big tax bills and years of high income. Of the $7.5 million in business and personal cash contributions reported to the IRS since 2005, more than 40%, $3.2 million, came starting in 2015 when Mr. Trump's philanthropy fell under scrutiny after he announced his White House bid. One of a few things that actually came under scrutiny, I guess. In 2017, his first year in office, he declared $1.9 million in cash gifts. In 2014, by contrast, he contributed $81,499. And his first two land easement donations were made in what the tax records show was a period of significant taxable income, 2005 and 2006, prime time for his reality TV fame. The President's Trump Organization biography says he is, quote, involved with numerous civic and charitable organizations. When he announced his campaign in 2015, he said he had given more than $102 million to charity over the previous 5 years. While it is possible that he chose not to report some of his giving, his tax records for 2010 to 2014 reflect far less than he claimed. $735,238 in cash and $26.8 million in land easements and other non-cash gifts. 6 months into the campaign, in December of 2015, another easement valued at $21.1 million was completed. In response to questions from the Times, Amanda Miller, a spokeswoman for the Trump Organization, said President Trump gives money privately. It's impossible to know how much he's given over the years. Oh, I see. The tax information analyzed by the Times includes annual totals for business and individual giving, but lists only certain corporate donations. The largest cash donation he reported for his businesses, made to his own foundation, was the $400,000 he received in 2011 for being roasted on Comedy Central. In 2014, his Virginia winery contributed a glass sculpture valued at $73,600 to a small historical society in Pennsylvania. And in 2016, another one of his companies gave $30,000 to the American Hotel and Lodging Education Foundation, a huge, huge charity helping millions of people around the world find very classy hotel rooms. I don't know what the hell that thing does, but it's probably only barely, registered as I'm sure it's a nonprofit, but I'm sure it's only barely worthy of tax-exempt status as it is. But okay, we'll give them the benefit of the doubt. They're fantastic and they help poor people. They don't. They don't. Even without the details of Mr. Trump's individual giving, the Times was able to identify public philanthropic promises that appear either to have been exaggerated or to have never materialized. That is classic. In each case, the size of his pledge exceeded what he told the IRS he had given in a particular year, and there's really no reason to be doing that, right? Why would you say, except obviously the only real purpose is to lie and get publicity for having pledged $1 million when you only gave $1,000. there's no reason to lie to the IRS about giving less. You should be, his play would ordinarily, you'd think, be exaggerating how much money he gave them so that he could claim a bigger deduction. It's backwards for what you would expect from him. In 2009, for example, he agreed to rent his Seven Springs estate. That's come up in these reports in the past. He agreed to rent it to, oh yes, right, I remember this story, to the Libyan dictator Muammar al-Gaddafi, who hoped to stay in a tent on the grounds during a meeting of the United Nations General Assembly. I remember this. Though the plans fell apart when local residents objected, you could see how they might, Gaddafi made a payment of $150,000, which Trump told CNN in 2011 he had given to charity. His 2009 tax returns, however, reported only $22,796 in business and personal cash gifts. So something happened to the other 120,000 extra dollars from that one. In 2015, Mr. Trump promised to donate the earnings from his book, Crippled America, How to Make America Great Again. Wow. That's a terrible title. I don't think I even realized that was... Okay. The profits of my book, I'm giving them away to a lot of different, including the vets, he said at a news conference. And you notice he didn't complete the sentence. I'm giving them away to a lot of different, he was about to say, I guess, charities. I don't know why he cuts it off. Including the vets, the veterans, who he stiffs later on. Anyway, the tax records show that Waxman Level Literary Agency, which represented Mr. Trump's book, made two payments to him in 2015 and 2016, totaling roughly $4.5 million. In those years, Trump reported giving a total of $1.3 million in cash to charity. So another one, let's see, so 4.5, 3. So $3.2 million mysteriously doesn't make it to any charity whatsoever. How crazy. Many wealthy individuals create their own foundations, often as a way to have greater control over their philanthropy. Big difference between the way he did it and everyone else does it. While Mr. Trump's foundation, started in 1988, gave millions to charity before shutting down in 2018, most of it was other people's money. Trump himself donated $5.4 million to the foundation, with the last contribution in 2008. According to the organization's tax filings. We all remember this from way back, right? The majority of the president's philanthropy, though, has consisted of his 4 land deals with conservation groups or the government. And I guess I'll just comment here. Don't get me wrong. It's nice when there are environmental easements. It creates a nice atmosphere in the area where it happens. But it's not charitable giving in the same sense, like when people think about, feeding the hungry or housing the homeless or whatever. Environmental easements do none of this, ever. They can't. They don't. That's not their purpose. They're nice. It's got a nice purpose. Sometimes they're abused and overused, but they're not traditional charitable purposes the way you and I think of them. All right, where were we? The majority, of course, of the president's philanthropy has actually been through these easements. His first easement donation, which yielded a tax deduction of $39.1 million in 2005, involved a parcel of land at his golf club in Bedminster, New Jersey. What a surprise. So it actually helps him as well. He gets to enjoy the quiet beauty of it all, and pretty much nobody else does. The next year, he donated 436 acres of land for a state park in Westchester and Putnam counties in New York, after development plans ran up against tough regulatory restrictions. While the precise value of the easement is not clear, he reported non-cash charitable contributions of $34 million that year. Mr. Trump had bought the property in the 1990s for $2 million, according to numerous published reports. Today, it is overgrown and has few facilities or visitors. The 2 most recent easement deductions are being examined by the New York Attorney General, Letitia James, part of a broader investigation into whether the Trump Organization inflated the value of assets to get loans and tax benefits. In 2014, after abandoning plans to develop an 11.5-acre property being used as a driving range at his Los Angeles golf club, Trump received a $25.1 million tax deduction for an easement agreement with a land conservancy. Few details of the inquiry into the deal have emerged. There are also, by the way, very few $25 million driving ranges out there. But this one made it. Court papers shed more light on other easements under investigation. In late 2015, Trump got a $21.1 million tax break for 158.6 acres of land at the Seven Springs estate, after years of unsuccessful attempts to build a golf course on it. The Attorney General's court filing says that after Trump abandoned plans to develop Seven Springs, he asked Sherry Dillon, you know her, right, the tax lawyer at Morgan Lewis, who had advised him in the past, to have the land appraised. Dillon was the one, again, just as a reminder, who showed up with him at that press conference, I guess post-election 2016 press conference, to announce his separation from his businesses with all those manila file folders full of blank papers. That's Sherry Dillon. Great lawyer, high profile, very well respected around the world, I'm telling you. Ms. Dillon told Cushman and Wakefield, the firm that did this appraisal, did we even, yeah, that's right, we said Sherry Dillon advised him to have the land appraised. So Dillon told Cushman and Wakefield, the appraisal firm, that the client blew up at her, and she leaned on the appraisers to take steps that would push the value up, according to the court filing. Why they didn't just say, F you, give me the money. I don't know. Several weeks ago, after months of delay, Trump's son Eric gave a deposition on the case. Mr. Trump has denied any wrongdoing. President Trump was not involved in the appraisals mentioned, which were done by the most respected, of course, the most respected appraisal and brokerage company in the country, said Ms. Miller, the Trump Organization's spokeswoman. Wow. So, that's it. That's the end of this. This is a very short installation then. I thought there was going to be considerably more. Well, actually, we kind of, I guess, gleaned all we needed from this round of discoveries from his tax documents that the Times has gotten a hold of. We've heard most of these stories before, but it is interesting to see some of these characters make recurring appearances, especially Sherry Dillon. Probably if we scroll back, we will find that we have time to piece together the larger picture of what the Times has put together from the tax information they've got on him. But on my way there, I thought I might stop on this BuzzFeed News piece also from a couple of days ago. What's the date on this one? October 21st. I thought this was kind of an intriguing piece here. BuzzFeed News, as I mentioned, Trump called the $10 million a loan. His campaign called it a donation. Who paid it back and how? And how, one wonders. But this has to do with his financing of his own campaign in 2016. Less about charitable donations, but again, financial trickery, chicanery, if you will, if I've pronounced the word correctly. Trump boasted about self-funding his 2016 campaign, says the subheader, but in its tense final moments, his advisors could only get him to agree to a loan. It was like a cash advance. The writers on this piece, Ken Bensinger and Kadia Goba, if I have not terribly mangled that name. But this appears to be the story of a last-minute emergency bailout of his 2016 campaign. I don't know whether they'll make the call about whether or not it was a but-for situation. Like, did Trump only manage to pull it out at the end of the campaign with this supposed self-funding, or was it just trickery to a short-term loan, and then he was just going to pull it out of the back end through donations, or what? Well, I guess we'll read the article and find out. Why don't we do that? As the 2020 presidential campaign hurtles toward a close, questions remain about a last-minute $10 million lifeline Trump threw to his previous campaign, the one that catapulted him into the presidency and caused all these troubles. as you know. Speculation has swirled around the source of that money, with one report suggesting Trump might have gotten the funds from a casino magnate looking for help building a bullet train from Los Angeles to Las Vegas. Another report pointed to the possibility of a shadowy foreign donation funneled through an Egyptian bank. Interesting. We don't hear much about Egyptian banks these days. But nothing is known about whether the $10 million loan, which the campaign, however, appears to have reported as a contribution, was ever repaid, who might have repaid it, and whether it would even be legal to do so. The very existence of the loan was a closely guarded secret until this month, when a newly unsealed document indicated that Trump's closest advisors convinced him to let the campaign borrow the money from him after he refused to just write a check. That's pretty interesting all by itself, but the fact that it was just recently discovered is also pretty intriguing. And then, of course, he refused to write a check. Well, that's no longer surprising about him. While the Trump campaign didn't respond to requests for comment on this story, the president and his advisors have always maintained his finances are above board. They are not, but that's how to read a Trumpster comment, in case you were wondering. By now, with his 2020 run under fire for a lack of financial transparency, and once again short on cash, significant questions remain about the mysterious 4-year-old loan and what it might say about the frothy final days of the 2016 election. If this was a loan, it should have been reported as a loan, said Brendan Fisher, director of federal reform at the Campaign Legal Center, which monitors money in politics. If it were a loan, he said, the transaction should also have been recorded on financial disclosures Trump was required to file, along with details of how the money was repaid. If there is some off-the-books mechanism that Trump is using to get repaid for his loans, that should be disclosed, Fisher added. It was late in the second presidential debate, and Trump was on the back foot. In the wake of the Access Hollywood tape, does everyone remember that? That was the one where he said, yeah, right. Okay, you remember. In the wake of the Access Hollywood tape, released just 3 days earlier, he was forced to defend what he referred to as locker room talk, while separately acknowledging that he did not pay income tax. Oh, 2 small items there I thought I might bring up at the end of the campaign. But he found something to brag about when it came to campaign financing. Unlike Hillary Clinton, he said, he couldn't be bought by powerful corporate interests because, of course, that was all he does during his life, but whatever. He couldn't be bought by powerful corporate interests because he was using his own money rather than taking big donations. By the time it's finished, I'll have more than $100 million invested, he claimed, adding that the campaign by that point was pretty much self-funding. Federal Election Commission data, however, shows that Trump had by then put up barely half that amount. Still a lot, right? $56.1 million. Records show that the campaign would return more than $12 million through payments for use of Trump's hotels, restaurants, golf resorts, and an airline he owns, a quote-unquote airline. That's his stash of private jets that he leases from himself anytime he goes anywhere, and also through reimbursements to his children for their travel during the campaign. Meanwhile, the campaign had been vastly outspent by Clinton, who was leading in most of the opinion polls. In the face of so many challenges, it was proving increasingly difficult for Trump's campaign to raise funds, and it was spending money far faster than it could raise it. By the third debate, on October 19th, his war chest had dwindled to just $16 million, less than half of what it had been at the beginning of the month. That day, Reuters released data suggesting that Clinton had a 95% chance of winning the Electoral College. Okay, we know what happened. Despite all that, a few hours before the debate, Steve Bannon, the campaign's CEO, and you don't often hear about campaign CEOs, to be honest, said Trump was confident. Right now, he really thinks he's going to win. But behind the scenes, Bannon would later tell the FBI the campaign was imploding. Not long after the debate, Bannon, Jeff DeWitt, the campaign's chief operating officer, Brad Parscale, its digital media director, and Jared Kushner, you know who he is, put their heads together to discuss finances, according to the FBI's account of the 2018 interview with Bannon that BuzzFeed News published this month. Bannon told investigators that it became apparent that if the campaign was going to make it over the finish line, Trump was going to have to write a very big check. Kushner said that was not going to happen. According to the account of Bannon's interview, Trump liked to back winners. Bannon recalled Kushner saying, adding that his father-in-law was a probability guy, who was not a guy who, while 6 to 8 points down, was going to write a $25 million check. Okay. Bannon said they figured that $10 million would at least allow them to get to the final television advertisement that they had planned. That's when Bannon said Steve Mnuchin, the former Goldman Sachs banker who was then Trump's national finance chair, put forward a novel solution. In a meeting with in the 26th floor offices of the Trump Tower in Manhattan, Mnuchin proposed that Trump put forward $10 million immediately. The campaign could repay him down the line with the small donations that were still coming in. It would be structured like a loan, complete with paperwork, like a term sheet. According to the FBI document, Mnuchin called it a cash advance. Federal records show that Trump had made his first loan to the campaign in April of 2015, several months before he formally declared his candidacy. Eventually, he loaned a total of $47.5 million to the effort, but in July 2016, at almost the same time he accepted the Republican nomination for president, he formally forgave all those previous loans, converting them into outright donations. Okay, well, that's something I guess you can do if you're a fake billionaire. We'll see where that leads us when we come back after this short break. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio, of course. Let's see. We left off just before the break reading in the middle of the BuzzFeed News article about that weird and indefinable $10 million transfer in the last days of the campaign from Trump to his campaign, and then, or maybe from Trump and his campaign, maybe elsewhere. Who knows where it came from? There's no way to tell. That's one of the problems here. All right. Oh, and because we're recording outside of normal recording hours, the phone actually rings in the background here. It's a little bit like calling Greg, who we don't have with us today. So just like that, we're back in our regular mode here. At $10 million, I'll continue on here, the new loan Trump was being asked to make would be the single largest chunk of money he'd put into his campaign, and based on Bannon's recollections, the candidate was far from convinced. Although federal campaign finance laws put strict limits on how much individuals can donate to politicians, there are no such caps for candidates who choose to donate to their own campaigns. By the time billionaire Michael Bloomberg dropped out of the Democratic primary this past March, seems like ancient history, right? He had contributed nearly $900 million of his own money to his campaign, putting him atop a long list of self-funded efforts that fell short. Candidates are also free to loan money to their campaigns, and many do. But there are more stringent rules about those transactions when it comes to repayment, particularly for loans that come late in the campaign cycle. Campaign finance law states that such loans may be repaid only with campaign contributions made on or before Election Day. and that any contributions coming in after the election can be used to pay only up to $250,000 of the loan. Anything beyond that is considered a donation. According to Bannon, he, Mnuchin, and Kushner had a 5-hour conversation with Trump that started in the Trump Tower offices and continued onto the Boeing 757 dubbed, but I say dumped, Trump Force One, which sounds a lot like Dump Force One, and I guess that's it. Anyway, that's the plane, that, of course, that he flew to campaign stops. They kept working on Trump until he couldn't take it anymore. I didn't realize you could do that to him over money. That's what investigators said Bannon told them anyway. Finally, Trump agreed to the plan. Mnuchin had prepared the documents in advance and pulled them out as soon as he got a yes. Oh, very, very good prep for him. That's a good job. Including a term sheet and information on how to wire the money into the campaign's accounts, the FBI document says. Last week, Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin acknowledged the loan had been made and the fact that he helped convince Trump to execute it, but provided no other details and did not respond to a request for comment. Trump was convinced the cash would be there. The FBI document continues. Trump understood the logic of it. During the final 20 days of a race for federal office, campaigns are required to file notice of any contributions or other deposits of $1,000 or more within 48 hours of receiving the funds. So, on October 28, 2016, just 11 days before the election, the $10 million was duly reported to the Federal Election Commission, but not as a loan. It was reported as a candidate contribution. To Fisher of the Campaign Law Center, the idea that Trump would write a large check, sign documents characterizing it as a loan, then almost immediately recast it as a donation just doesn't add up. One of the people present during the negotiations with Trump, who agreed to speak to BuzzFeed News only on condition of anonymity, said it wasn't until after the election that Trump was persuaded to forgive the loan. According to this source, his advisors told him, quote, it would look bad to insist on repayment. If so, Trump waited at least 2 weeks to reverse course and donate the money, which would mean that at the time the campaign reported it, the $10 million donation should still have been characterized as a loan. On the same day the money was reported to election officials, Trump appeared on Fox News and mentioned the $10 million. I'm sure they must have just grabbed their heads on that one. But when asked whether he'd come through with his pledge to put a total of $100 million into the race, he hedged. We'll see what's needed, he said. Other than some in-kind contributions for rent and payroll, records show Trump did not donate again, meaning his total contributions for this cycle fell about $33 million short of his pledge. Bannon, who was indicted on fraud and money laundering charges in August, did not respond to requests for comment on the loan, and the White House referred requests to the campaign, which also did not respond to multiple messages seeking clarification. Meanwhile, the most recent filings from the 2020 race show that Trump, once again lagging in the polls, has taken a different approach this time around. Other than a $5,000 donation to his own super PAC in October of 2017, he hasn't donated or loaned a dime. I would raise $1 billion in one day if I wanted to, said Trump, campaigning Monday, a few Mondays ago now, in Prescott, Arizona. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do it. I put in a lot of money when I ran originally. I put in a lot of money into this campaign, my primary campaign, and I never thought it was appreciated. They never gave me credit for it. So that's the answer. That's the end of his donations. Very interesting. And we'll see where Letitia James goes with this one. I think it'll take some more investigation before they even figure out what to make of it. I mean, there was some real promise up at the beginning of this thing. I heard no mention in reading through this about any kind of Egyptian bank. Now I'm curious about that. And I don't know, where does that link us to? It's linked. It's to a CNN article here from when? October 14th. And then, of course, there was the mention of possibly having gotten the money from a casino magnate. Would that be Sheldon Adelson or another one? Let's take a look. Okay. That's in reference to one of the other New York Times pieces on the president's taxes. Well, that may be where we have to head to next and figure out what that's about. What about the Egyptian bank situation? Let's see what that one's about. Exclusive. Feds chased suspected foreign link to Trump's 2016 campaign cash for 3 years. This one illustrated by a photo of Trump and of Robert Mueller. So I guess that's the feds who are chasing this down. This is also October 14th piece here. So I guess, the other one was October 9th, right? I guess that leaves us with the question of which one to go to first. I'm actually more interested in the Egyptian bank stuff and why that didn't get mentioned in here. But let's take a look. There's a section on the last minute loan down at the bottom. This is a piece from Caitlin Polance, Evan Perez, and Jeremy Herb in CNN here, October 14th. For more than 3 years, federal prosecutors investigated whether money flowing through an Egyptian state-owned bank could have backed millions of dollars Donald Trump donated to his own campaign days before he won the 2016 election, multiple sources familiar with the investigation told CNN. The investigation, which both predated and outlasted Special Counsel Robert Mueller's probe, examined whether there was an illegal foreign campaign contribution. It represents one of the most prolonged efforts by federal investigators to understand the president's foreign financial ties and became a significant but hidden part of the special counsel's pursuits. The investigation was kept so secret. How secret was it? It was so secret that at one point investigators locked down an entire floor of a federal courthouse in Washington, D.C. so Mueller's team could fight for the Egyptian bank's records in closed-door court proceedings following a grand jury subpoena. This sounds awfully familiar. Did we read this? The probe, which closed this summer with no charges filed, has never before been described publicly. This does sound familiar to me. The locking down of the entire floor of the federal courthouse. Let me just see here. I wonder whether if I searched in the archives of Pocket, will I find this story? Let's see. Feds chased suspected foreign link. Let's see. Search here for suspected foreign link and see whether that turns anything up in the archives, which is where I file things after I've used them for a show. I'm just curious because I may have it in, and maybe I didn't archive it. It's very interesting because that language of having locked down the whole floor is very familiar. I mean, it could be something it's definitely in my list here. I don't know whether it was something I read aloud on the show or whether I just read through it off the air. Well, let's continue here. The investigation was kept so secret. You remember all that. They locked down an entire floor of the federal courthouse. Prosecutors suspected there could be a link between the Egyptian bank and Trump's campaign contribution, according to several of the sources, but they could never prove a connection. It's not clear that investigators had ever had concrete evidence of a relevant bank transfer from the Egyptian bank, but multiple sources said there was sufficient information to justify the subpoena and keep the criminal campaign finance investigation open after the Mueller probe ended. CNN learned of the Egypt investigation from more than a dozen sources familiar with the effort, as well as through hints in public records, including newly released court documents and Mueller witness interview summaries called 302s that CNN and BuzzFeed obtained through lawsuits. In a court filing last month, the Justice Department confirmed that when the special counsel's office shut down in 2019, Mueller transferred an ongoing foreign campaign contribution investigation to prosecutors in Washington. Some of CNN's sources have confirmed that the case, which Mueller cryptically called a foreign campaign contribution probe, was in fact the Egypt investigation. The probe was confirmed this week, a couple weeks ago now, by a Justice Department senior official who responded to CNN's queries. The case was first looked at by the special counsel investigators who failed to bring a case, and then it was looked at by the U.S. Attorney's Office and career prosecutors in the National Security Section, who also were unable to bring a case. Based upon the recommendations of both the FBI and those career prosecutors, Michael Sherwin, the acting U.S. Attorney, formally closed the case in July. Part of what drew investigators' initial interest in the matter was intelligence, including from an informant, that suggested that there could have been money from an Egyptian bank that ended up backing Trump's last-minute injection of $10 million into his 2016 campaign, according to two of the sources. Among the chief questions prosecutors sought to answer, and apparently never did, was whether Trump was supported by or was indebted to a foreign power. The investigation even went as far as the U.S. Supreme Court, the only time during the 2-year Mueller investigation a dispute went to the High Court. The justices ultimately declined to hear the case. Yet neither the special counsel's office nor prosecutors who carried on the case after Mueller got a complete picture of the president's financial entanglements. Prosecutors in Washington even proposed subpoenaing financial records tied to Trump before top officials finally concluded this summer they had reached a dead end, the sources said. As aggressive as Mueller's office was, so-so, charging multiple Trump advisors for obstruction, gaining cooperators, indicting Russians for election-related malfeasance, and documenting attempts by the president to obstruct justice, the special counsel has faced criticism, including from one of its own prosecutors, for not taking bold enough investigative steps to gain access to the president's finances. Jason Miller, Jason Miller, a senior advisor to the Trump 2020 campaign, and it's most disgusting, said in response to CNN's questions, President Trump has never received a penny from Egypt. So I guess that's it. He's guilty. A spokesman for the Egyptian president declined to comment. I'm not certain why he would have anything to do with it, but maybe. After Trump's election win, the FBI began working with prosecutors in the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office to investigate the Egypt matter, according to a person familiar with the office. It was something that looked interesting, that person said. We really didn't do much work on it before turning it loose. In May 2017, after Trump fired FBI Director James Comey, Robert Mueller was appointed special counsel, and he took on the case. Mueller's primary task was to investigate Russian government attempts to interfere in the 2016 election, which had consumed the political and investigative conversations in the early days of the Trump presidency. But Mueller's mandate also allowed him to take on related criminal investigations, which in this case included another probe of potential foreign influence connected to the campaign. According to a recent book by Andrew Weissman, one of Mueller's senior prosecutors, the special counsel's office consisted of 3 principal teams. And we did read this account of his book, right? One focused on former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort, another on Russia's election interference, and a third on the president's attempts to obstruct justice. But there was a 4th team, CNN has learned, one partly dedicated to investigating the Egypt matter. Zainab Ahmad, a former international terrorism prosecutor, and Brandon von Grack, a national security and counterintelligence specialist, co-led it, according to sources. Public records also show they focused on cases separate from other trial attorneys in the special counsel's office and had senior titles equivalent to other Mueller team leaders. Van Grack largely focused on the case against former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. Ahmad assisted Van Grack on Flynn, then devoted herself to the Egypt investigation. Ahmad, when reached by CNN, wouldn't speak about her work in the special counsel's investigation. She's now a lawyer in private practice. Van Grack is now a Justice Department prosecutor overseeing foreign lobbying investigations and didn't respond to a request for comment. Mueller's team tried to understand both the $10 million contribution Trump gave to his campaign 11 days before the 2016 election and the Trump campaign's ties to Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, according to sources and redacted interview records released from the Mueller investigation. In the closing weeks of the 2016 campaign, Trump and Sisi met in New York during the United Nations General Assembly. The Republican presidential candidate hit it off with the dictator, of course, because he was a dictator. Sisi said afterwards that Trump would no doubt be a strong president, while Trump called the Egyptian leader a fantastic guy with whom he had good chemistry. A notable difference from Obama administration policy, which was reflected in Hillary Clinton's focus on Egypt's human rights record during her own meeting with Sisi at the General Assembly. Sisi became the first foreign leader to call and congratulate Trump after he won the election. At a 2019 G7 summit, Trump called out, "Where's my favorite dictator?" as he awaited the Egyptian president, according to press reports. Why would the Egyptian president be at the G7 summit? I don't know. Maybe he was visiting. Okay, now the section on the last-minute loan. By summer of 2017, Mueller's office was handling the Egyptian investigation gingerly, with the team of prosecutors and FBI personnel often working without sharing full details with the other teams in the office, according to multiple accounts of the office's dynamics. CNN sent Mueller detailed questions about the Egypt investigation for this story. He declined comment. One official familiar with the work said some investigators believed the Egypt inquiry presented a more direct avenue for Mueller's team to examine Trump's finances, in part because it did not have an obvious tie to Russia. Diving into Trump's finances, however, was highly sensitive, so much so that Mueller suspected the president would fire him if the White House learned his finances were being probed, crossing a so-called red line Trump set earlier in the Mueller investigation. And, to me, I say, so what? Get fired. But okay. Yet understanding Trump's finances was crucial to the Egypt investigation, especially regarding the $10 million he gave to his campaign. Needing a final push before Election Day as the polls tightened in 2016, the Trump campaign was running low on cash. Trump's top campaign officials scrambled to convince him to inject money, according to memos of witness interviews from the investigation and contemporaneous news reports. Trump lagged well behind a pledge he had made to spend $100 million of his own money in his campaign. Less than 2 weeks before Election Day, Trump wrote his campaign a $10 million check, publicly calling it a loan. Campaign finance records showed it as his single largest political contribution by far, and not one the campaign would reimburse him for. Federal law enforcement officials suspected, in part because of intelligence information, that there was money moving through the Egyptian bank that could connect to Trump's campaign donation, according to the sources. Yet untangling the web of Trump's complex business interests ultimately remained out of reach. Campaign finance laws prohibit foreign political contributions to campaigns for public office. A financial tie between a sitting president and a foreign country could also have explosive national security consequences. Mueller's office pressed witnesses to explain how the Trump-Sisi meeting in late 2016 came about. Ahmad, whose aims on the investigation were cloaked in secrecy, was repeatedly present in interviews touching on both Trump's $10 million contribution to his campaign and the campaign's ties to Egypt. For instance, in one witness interview in November of 2017, Ahmad and the FBI pressed an unnamed former staffer on the Trump campaign, Transition, and National Security Council about Trump's meeting with Sisi and her interactions with Egyptian nationals. Another witness, according to interview memos, spoke to investigators in August of 2018 about the Trump-Sisi meeting and Egypt's stance on U.S. presidential elections. I mean, I think if it was Steve Bannon, they'd be free to say so, but they haven't. That's interesting. Although, again, I do remind you that Bannon does in fact meet that description. He's an unnamed former, or he would have, and if he didn't name him, he'd be unnamed, former staffer on the Trump campaign, and in the transition, and on the National Security Council before they booted him off there. And, of course, you'll recall that Bannon for years lived in what everybody called the Breitbart Embassy in D.C., but which turned out to be owned by some sort of weird, mysterious, shadowy Egyptian political figure, in case you've forgotten between then and now. Mueller's team repeatedly asked witnesses questions about Trump foreign policy campaign advisor Walid Fares, Phares, and his ties to Egypt, after intelligence pointed them toward him. The New York Times first reported in June about the special counsel's investigation into Fares and his suspected role in an Egyptian influence effort. It led to no charges. The FBI has not made public records that show Mueller's team interviewing Fares, although the former Trump advisor has said he spoke to investigators. Fares' assistant declined to comment. In an initial interview with the special counsel's office, senior campaign official and White House advisor Steve Bannon, see, they do name him here, also discussed his role in setting up the meeting between Trump and Sisi. In a session months later, Bannon was asked about Trump's $10 million contribution to his campaign, according to another recent release of Mueller's interview memos. Bannon explained to Mueller's investigators how Trump initially resisted cutting his campaign such a large check, and that Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, doubted that Trump would do so, saying that was not going to happen, according to Bannon. But Trump was talked into providing the last-minute money by future Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin and Kushner, somehow, Bannon said. Mnuchin described the money as a cash advance, Bannon said, and Trump eventually agreed to wire the money. Trump was convinced the cash would be there, Bannon said, according to the interview summary. That's a weird way of putting it. Trump was convinced the cash would be there. He's the one putting the cash in. There's something weird going on with this situation. And I mean, convinced the cash would be there, like as though he wasn't sure what he had in his accounts. But the $10 million will be in this account because I don't know what. An Egyptian will put it there? A spokesperson for Mnuchin at the Treasury Department confirmed Bannon's description of convincing Trump to make the loan and said that Mnuchin had no knowledge of how Trump had $10 million available to him. Although I assumed that they all would have assumed that, of course, he had it because he's a billionaire, a fake billionaire, but you know how it is. But interesting that even Mnuchin at that point knows there's questions about whether or not there's going to be that. But Trump's convinced the money would be there. That is a very odd construction. Records of the special counsel's office interviews, which remain heavily redacted, do not make clear whether witnesses were asked directly about money connected to Egypt. At the same time, investigators may have sought not to tip their suspicions to witnesses, especially those like Bannon, who were close to the president. Representatives for Bannon didn't respond to CNN's request for comment. Trump himself never had to answer questions directly about his $10 million campaign contribution, in part because of the broadness of questions submitted to his lawyers to answer in writing. Mueller asked the president, "Did any person or entity inform you during the campaign that any foreign government or foreign leader, other than Russia or Vladimir Putin, had provided, wished to provide, or offered to provide tangible support for your campaign?" Trump wrote back in his written answers that he had, quote, "no recollection of being told during the campaign of support from a foreign government." All right, now the mystery court fight, just as we come up to our next break. The Egyptian investigation also led to one of the most secretive court proceedings in Washington in years. Until now, the case was only known to be a fight over a grand jury subpoena between the Mueller team and a foreign government-owned company. But CNN has learned the case was a fight over records from an Egyptian national bank. We did mention this proceeding when it happened, and of course had no idea exactly what it was, but I guess now we know. An Egyptian national bank. In July of 2018, the Mueller team issued a secret grand jury subpoena for records to the Egyptian bank, sparking a months-long court fight that only gradually became public as it progressed through the court system. Soon enough, the bank was arguing it shouldn't have to give Mueller records because it was interchangeable with the foreign government that owned it. The U.S. courts disagreed repeatedly, saying the company couldn't be immune from the Mueller team's subpoena. At the time, the courts and Mueller's team took extreme caution to keep the matter confidential. One judge, Beryl Howell of the D.C. District Court, wrote that the case dealt with foreign interference in the 2016 presidential election and potential collusion in those efforts by American citizens. The fight was so closely guarded that it took months for the names of lawyers involved to emerge, only becoming public first through CNN reporting, then confirmed by court records. Attorneys who represented the bank in the subpoena fight and a representative from their law firm, Alston and Bird, did not respond to CNN's inquiries for this story. When the Federal Appeals Court in Washington, D.C. heard arguments in the case in December of 2018, security cleared journalists from an entire floor of the federal courthouse, allowing attorneys involved in the case to enter and exit the building and the courtroom without being seen. CNN, however, spotted Mueller team prosecutors, including Ahmad, returning to the special counsel's office minutes after the hearing ended. The case even landed before the Supreme Court in early 2019. The High Court ultimately declined the company's bid to block Mueller's subpoena in March of 2019. Even then, however, the standoff between U.S. prosecutors and the Egyptian bank ended in a stalemate. The bank had handed over almost 1,000 pages of documents to prosecutors, translated into English, according to redacted court records that were eventually released after the Mueller investigation concluded. But that didn't satisfy prosecutors either in the Mueller investigation or in the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office. The bank's lawyers professed it had, quote, gone to great lengths to find and voluntarily produce documents responsive to the subpoena. What more could the special counsel want? They asked, according to court transcripts. The federal investigators told the court they believed there must be more, and even the judge acknowledged gaps in the bank's records. In the end, it was the bank's word against the investigators. The court proceedings ended with the prosecutors getting nothing more than what the bank was willing to turn over, and the bank was excused from hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines that it had accrued for defying the subpoena. It appeared to be a dead end, and not justification enough for Mueller to keep his office open to finish the case alone. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's continue with the reading of the CNN investigation into the investigation of the Egypt connection, something we haven't spent a great deal of time on up until now. Continuing on with the reading here in a new section that is itself titled Continuing Robustly After Mueller. Investigators faced a crossroads in early 2019 as Mueller finalized his report. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein and then new Attorney General William Barr oversaw the end of Mueller's probe and were briefed on investigations still ongoing, but they left it up to Mueller's team and the FBI to determine which unresolved matters should be sent to U.S. attorneys' offices so Mueller's office could close, according to sources briefed on the events. In late March 2019, shortly after Mueller's investigation concluded, Howell, overseeing final court proceedings in the Egyptian bank's subpoena case, asked a prosecutor point blank if the investigation was over. No, it's continuing. I can say it's continuing robustly, David Goodhand of the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office told the court. Another prosecutor in the office told the judge the investigation, even after Mueller, was very much a live issue, requiring a great deal of resources, time, and attention by the government, according to a transcript of a late March 2019 court hearing. For the past year and a half, the matter was kept even quieter under Barr and 3 different U.S. attorneys in Washington than it had been under Mueller. Behind the scenes, the investigation hinged on whether prosecutors, having been thwarted by the Egyptian government, had enough evidence to seek more information related to Trump's finances. At one point, prosecutors wanted to subpoena Trump's bank records, according to sources briefed on the investigation. The decision to approve the subpoena fell to U.S. Attorney Jesse Liu in Washington, D.C. Liu spent weeks poring over the investigative records before rejecting the request. According to the sources, Liu told prosecutors she didn't believe they had met the standard needed to seek the records. The investigation stagnated, but Liu didn't close the case. She declined to comment for this story. It's unclear how much activity occurred after Liu rejected the subpoena request. Prosecutors who disagreed with her decision believed it was now impossible to resolve questions about Trump's 2016 campaign contribution. Liu told people in her office that if the investigation had produced enough evidence, Mueller would have made the decision to take additional steps, according to sources. Interesting cross-up there. Liu's tenure as U.S. Attorney came to an abrupt end in February, despite knuckling under for Trump. Imagine that. When she was pushed out after Republican lawmakers took aim at her over the handling of other cases. Michael Sherwin, the current acting U.S. Attorney in D.C., stepped into the job in May and reviewed the Egypt investigation. Sherwin met with FBI investigators and counterintelligence prosecutors before deciding to close the case this summer, sources briefed on the matter said. Next up, Mueller's foreign campaign contribution case. Mueller and the Justice Department have taken pains to keep quiet that the investigation even existed. The Mueller report does not mention the Egypt investigation, though some parts of the report are still redacted. The largely public table of contents outlines nothing that closely resembles descriptions of the case. Mueller dropped only one hint, listing it among 11 cases he investigated, then transferred to other offices when his shop closed. For more than a year, the entry was redacted. Just last month, the Justice Department lifted the redaction on this 11th case and said the case was closed. On paper, Mueller described the investigation with only 3 vague words: foreign campaign contribution. That's that. That wraps up that mystery, and of course solves nothing. But I'm at least surprised, and I don't know. I don't know whether I don't know how to feel about it. But surprised by the fact that Jessie Liu did what the administration wanted her to do in quashing this case, and still gets pushed out anyway. Too much is not enough for the Trump administration. And as we've learned with everything else, everything Trump touches dies. There's no pleasing the man, and he'll be out to get you eventually. You knuckle under once, he'll look for you to do it 2, 3, and 4 more times. And if you don't do it, once won't do the trick. I think we all probably knew that too. Jessie didn't. Now she does. All right, how about if we jumped off track then for just a moment anyway to pick up on this story that's just sort of been sitting out there and waiting to be included in our roundup. It doesn't segue naturally necessarily off of what we've been talking about, but what does in this day and age? Actually, you can fill entire shows with things that flow naturally into one another, but occasionally you have to skip around and take a sampling of the corruption waters from elsewhere. This time, a CNN piece written up and recorded as well by Jake Tapper. Administration officials alarmed by White House push to fast-track lucrative 5G spectrum contract, sources say. And fast-tracking contracts usually means some implication of corruption when it comes to the Trump administration, certainly. And 5G, which, of course, QAnon accuses of being at least partially responsible for the COVID-19 outbreak somehow. So what a fun combination that will be. They're not, I don't think they make an appearance anywhere in this, but what must they think of the administration fast-tracking 5G towers around the country if it indeed causes coronavirus, or even if it doesn't, because who cares about facts, right? Okay. Well, anyway, keep that in the back of your mind as we read about this other aspect of 5G. Senior officials throughout various departments and agencies of the Trump administration tell CNN they are alarmed at White House pressure, of course, to grant what would essentially be a no-bid contract to lease the Department of Defense's mid-band spectrum, premium real estate for the booming and lucrative 5G market, to Rivada Networks. I don't know how they pronounce that, but R-I-V-A-D-A, Rivada Networks, a company in which prominent Republicans and supporters of President Donald Trump have investments. The pressure campaign to fast-track Rivada's request for proposal, or RFP, by using authorities that would preclude a competitive bidding process intensified in September, and has been led by White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, who has nothing else to do, I'm sure, who was acting at Trump's behest, sources with knowledge tell CNN. To push his case, Meadows has sometimes used as his proxy an individual identified by sources in the telecommunications industry as a top financial management official in the U.S. Army. Sources tell CNN that Trump was encouraged to help Rivada by Fox News commentator and veteran GOP strategist Karl Rove, everyone's favorite, a lobbyist for and investor in Rivada. Untold billions are at stake. That'd be just great to top this all off with billions of dollars going to Karl Rove, right? A government auction of 70 megahertz of spectrum in August went for more than $4.5 billion. The Rivada bid would be for 350 megahertz of spectrum, 5 times that amount. Rove denied to CNN that Rivada is seeking an RFP or any non-competitive process. If we were offered a no-bid contract, we would turn it down, he told CNN. I'm sure. The technology should stand on its own. Everyone believes that from Karl Rove. Denials notwithstanding, informed sources tell CNN that the White House is unquestionably pressuring the Pentagon to approve what would likely be, in the words of one senior administration official, the biggest handoff of economic power to a single entity in history. That doesn't sound good. And to do so without full examination of the impact on national security and without a competitive bidding process. Craig Moffett, a highly regarded Wall Street analyst of the telecommunications sector, concluded in an October 7th research paper, the whole story smacks of cronyism at best and reeks of the swamp at worst. Of course, I'm hung up with the fact that there's a typo in there, and it should be an October 7th research paper, totally ignoring the substance of the story. Spectrum is intensely valuable, Rove told CNN. God is not inventing any more. There is a finite amount of spectrum available to carry wireless communications. Newt Gingrich, another old favorite, making an appearance here, the former Republican Speaker of the House and noted Trump supporter, has also been advocating for the Pentagon to share its 5G network with commercial users, and doing so in a way that has left insiders under the impression that he lobbied for Rivada. Gingrich tells CNN that he never advocated for Rivada specifically, and did all of it pro bono as a citizen. Because I was just walking down the street one day, and I was like, you know who needs a no-bid contract? Rivada. I don't know who they are, but they feel like a quality institution for me. Rather than go out and get that sandwich right now, why don't I do some pro bono lobbying for Rivada? I'm sure that totally works in everybody else's life, right? And he's doing this from Vatican City somehow, by the way. All right. When asked directly for a comment about alarm that the White House was pressuring officials to offer Rivada the RFP, a White House official told CNN that the White House has not taken a position in favor of any company over another with regard to the 5G spectrum, and insisted that conversations are ongoing, but it is still pre-decisional. Regardless, whatever decision is ultimately made will be a result of best cost/benefit for the taxpayer, not any political reasons. Yes, of course. The Pentagon declined to comment, because they're smarter than that. A spokesman for Rivada denies that the company is pursuing a non-competitive RFP. Absolutely not, Rivada spokesman Brian Carney told CNN. We have always advocated for a competitive process. Trump's top economic advisor, Larry Kudlow, has been arguing against anything but free market competition for the mid-band spectrum. That I actually maybe believe. Which is seen as ideal for 5G because it can carry loads of data while also traveling significant distances. For years, Trump seemingly agreed with Kudlow. Yet, something changed come election time, sources tell CNN, and the president began pushing Meadows to help Rivada. Maybe they have the $10 million needed for his campaign that he won't write a check for. That could be it. Maybe that's the tie to the previous stories in the show. Informed sources speculate that Trump may have been trying to curry favor with Rove, who has never been a reliable member of the MAGA team, but remains a powerful fundraising force and strategist in GOP politics. So it could be a one-off thing here. Still about money, essentially. A more benign interpretation might be that the president and Meadows are focused on having 5G networks spread as quickly and safely across the U.S. and have been frustrated with Pentagon and FCC timelines and bureaucracy. Our next section here is about Pentagon resistance. Let's see what they're up to. Pentagon leaders are resisting the move, sources tell CNN, since they are concerned that this is being rushed without thoroughly vetting the impact it could have on military readiness. I'd always be concerned that something is being rushed by the Trump administration without thoroughly vetting impact on anything. So they're probably right. Pentagon lawyers have told the White House that their department has no authority to issue RFPs for the purpose of leasing or selling off its spectrum, and they think that to do so in the manner the White House is pushing would be a complete deviation from normal rules and regulations. But who cares? Even if the Pentagon had the authority to do this and didn't have qualms about doing it in a non-competitive way, sources say that Pentagon officials are unsure that Rivada has the ability to lease the spectrum for commercial use, while also preserving the U.S. military's ability to use the spectrum for military exercises and the small thing like the defense of the country. Rivada officials are publicly confident about their ability to do both, but that confidence is not shared by many key players in this process. One Pentagon official told CNN that while Rivada believes it has the best solution for sharing the spectrum, the Pentagon hasn't vetted that assertion, so it would be premature to ask the company for an RFP, which would be an absolute goldmine if awarded, the official said. FCC officials have also been stunned at the White House's push, both at its attempt to do this using other agencies instead of their independent commission, and the attempt to do so without respecting the normal independent bidding process. Because why respect anything? Concern on Capitol Hill is the next section here. Both Democrats and Republicans on Capitol Hill are concerned. House Energy and Commerce Committee Chairman Frank Pallone, Democrat of New Jersey, and the chair of the relevant subcommittee, Mike Doyle, Democrat of Pennsylvania, recently requested more information about whether the White House has instructed DoD to proceed immediately to a request for a proposal in order to move forward toward a national 5G network. According to press accounts, several political operatives or lobbyists with close ties to President Trump or his staff are pushing for the seismic shift in spectrum policy contemplated by the RFI. It says in this case RFI. I'm not certain why, but that's what it says. These reports also suggest these Republican operatives are working for the benefit of a specific company, Rivada Incorporated, which has long championed a national network that Rivada would construct and operate using its sharing technology, Pallone and Doyle wrote. It's not just Democrats who have raised red flags. At the end of September, Senator John Thune, Republican of South Dakota, along with 18 other Republican senators, protested any potential move which would not rely on private industry and market forces to foster multiple facilities-based 5G networks, but rather push nationalizing 5G and experimenting with untested models for 5G deployment. The GOP lawmakers did not mention Rivada by name. Too many Republican bigwigs connected with that name to dare to do that, I guess. Next section, I don't know if it's the last one. Failed efforts to win first responder contract. Rivada Networks is a privately held communications company that won or has won government contracts in the past. Among its investors is, another favorite, Peter Thiel, the noted tech venture capitalist billionaire, part-time vampire apparently, and Trump supporter. Spokespeople for Thiel did not respond to a request for comment. By the way, speaking of QAnon and their, what should be their interest in this story, given that QAnon has moved on to the theory in which power brokers, chiefly Democrats, of course, are victimizing children, both as pedophiles and as vampires, and extracting, adrenochrome from their blood or something or the other. I mean, it doesn't worry any of them that Peter Thiel is a giant Trump supporter and financier, and he actually, literally is, tinkering around with replacing his blood with the blood of children, isn't it? Like in an attempt at some sort of immortality project. I can't remember exactly what stupid thing it is he's tinkering with, but why doesn't that ring QAnon bells? Because they're crazy. So I don't know. I am looking for consistency out of idiots. So I should just stop. It's just curious is all. Anyway, let's see. Where were we? Thiel and spokespeople didn't respond to any requests for comment. Beyond the enthusiasm of Rivada's investors and lobbyists, many administration officials are confused as to why Rivada is even being considered for the lucrative contract. It's going to turn out to be like one of those whitefish energy operations, or like the thing that Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman threw together. I'm just curious why that's not. I mean, I guess they've won contracts before, so maybe it's not quite that bad. In 2016 and 2017, the company pursued a nationwide public safety contract, First Responder Network Authority, losing out to AT&T, which is a large company that people have heard of. AT&T is the parent company of CNN, by the way. It notes here parenthetically. But no one affiliated with this story has communicated with anyone at AT&T in any way about this story. Rivada appealed that decision, which a federal court rejected. The grounds on which we were turned down was that we did not charge first responders enough, Rove said. That sounds like a Karl Rove lie to me. All right, so that's it. So they lost to AT&T, and Karl Rove's contention is that the reason that this company that no one has ever heard of lost to AT&T was they didn't charge enough, especially charge first responders enough. The prices should have been higher. Then it would have worked. Yeah, okay. That's not how the court would put it. In her 2017 ruling, Judge Elaine Kaplan said that due to Rivada's financial situation and the restrictions on the solicitation, there was an unacceptably high likelihood that the banks might invoke those conditions, leaving Rivada without the financial capacity to even begin performance on the contract. So that's it. We didn't charge enough money, so therefore we wouldn't have enough financial resources to do the project. So that's some interesting spin Rove has given it. The court thought you didn't have the financial wherewithal to actually execute this project, which you would have if you had charged first responders considerably more money. And so therefore the real fault lies in your not having charged first responders enough, and AT&T is definitely going to shake them down. That must be why they got the contract. That's Rovian spin for you. I wonder if that's what he was doing. The court also noted that FirstNet had assessed that Rivada possessed few capabilities, staff, or financial resources, did not have material experience in building and operating a nationwide wireless network, and lacked any experience in supervising a project of the size and scope of the nationwide public safety broadband network. We think that the evaluation committee in FirstNet erred because it judged Rivada Networks as a standalone entity bidding for FirstNet. Carney told CNN, that's the spokesperson, right? Noting that Rivada was working with a consortium of several large communications companies, all from Canada, I guess. But Rivada Networks, you wouldn't know them. Rivada Networks didn't bid on FirstNet. Rivada Mercury, a consortium jointly owned by Rivada, Harris, whatever they are, Fujitsu, and Black and Veatch, V-E-A-T-C-H, IIRC. Black and Veatch, IIRC. It says, if I recall correctly, is that right? IIRC in parentheses. Is that something that Tapper wrote as a note to himself and forgot to erase in this? All right, well, I don't know whether he recalls correctly or not, but he thinks Black and Veatch was part of this consortium that bid on FirstNet. Again, that's Rivada Mercury, a consortium jointly owned by Rivada, Harris, Fujitsu, and Black and Veatch, maybe. Speeding the process and not doing any proofreading is the next section. Earlier this year, Meadows asked Pentagon leadership to examine what could be done to free up some of this 5G spectrum for auction by the FCC, and Chief Information Officer Dana Deasy was assigned to the task, according to sources, just regular sources. Just once they were sources. They haven't become resources yet, you see. All right, that's my Trumpian explanation for having misread that. This task, which would normally take around 15 months, was fast-tracked to take only 15 weeks. And it's because of me. I did it myself. In August, the White House and Pentagon announced plans to free up for auction 100 megahertz worth of spectrum. In September, the FCC proposed a plan for doing so. Let's do it. That's the plan. With a scheduled auction end date of December 2021. It's a very long, slow auction. This process is being done by the book, observers note, albeit extremely quickly. But somehow it's going to stretch out to December of 2021. Separately, in September, the Pentagon issued a request for information, that's an RFI, about what should be done with a band of spectrum that Rivada has its eyes on. The due date for the RFI responses was Monday. What Monday? One of the ones in the past. I don't think it's the most recent Monday. I forget how old this article is. Beyond that, and less transparently, is the push by the White House to force the Pentagon to hand over control of this mid-band spectrum to Rivada, sources tell CNN. Something is really fishy about this, a senior administration told CNN. Neither Rove nor Carney would offer any names when asked who the company had lobbied. We have spoken to people in the administration about what we support, Carney told CNN, and that's the final word on things. Okay, well, a lot of weird lies being told, but a lot of money at stake. By the way, the date on this article was, in fact, Tuesday, October 20th, 2020. So, the Monday they're talking about is the one that's coming up on 2 weeks ago, I guess. So a relatively recent story still. Just hasn't really broken out just yet, but feels like the sort of thing that we ought to get ahead of. I don't think there's going to be any eyes on it before the election, which might be a great time for them to try and do this thing while everybody's eyes are on the election. Or, maybe it's something that waits until afterwards. But it does feel like one of those stories that has been sitting around, and I feel like we got to get out ahead of so that we aren't bashing our head against the desk saying, I knew it, I should have said something about that, when it breaks huge in the days to come. I don't know. Doesn't really sound like it's going to be a real pot boiler here, but you never know. There's billions of dollars at stake, and Karl Rove, Newt Gingrich, and Peter Thiel are all involved in it somehow. And that does feel like something likely to explode. Well, we've got a couple of seconds here, a couple of minutes really, before our next break to try and squeeze something else in. It won't quite fit, but we'll shift gears one more time just for fun. A Politico piece here. Trump's case against Omarosa, we forgot all about that one, exposes another problem, unpaid legal bills. That should come as a surprise to no one, of course. The case is just one of many lingering court battles, the subheader says, that the campaign has launched but not completed, with 2 weeks left before Election Day. And, of course, we're down to much less now, just a few days. Donald Trump's campaign wants Omarosa Manigault Newman to pay up for penning an incriminating tell-all book about the president in 2018. But it's the Trump campaign that hasn't paid its bills. This is a piece prepared for us by Anita Kumar over at Politico. The delinquent $52,000 payment, revealed in a previously unreported letter dated October 14th and obtained by Politico, is just one example of how the Trump campaign is handling the flurry of legal actions it has taken to both protect the president and attack his enemies in the final weeks of the campaign. In some instances, the campaign is pressing ahead. In others, it has let the cases go dormant. The through line, however, is that the campaign has started a lot of fights in court, yet it is not close to resolving them, with just 2 weeks, now even less, left until Election Day. In the action against Manigault Newman, the campaign may simply let the case dissolve. In 2018, the Trump campaign filed an arbitration case against the former West Wing aide over her book, which rocked the White House with stories of Trump using lewd, sexist, and racist language. At one point, Trump's attorneys suggested Newman pay for a nearly $1 million ad campaign to counteract the long-term adverse effects of her remarks. It would be a rather novel solution to things. And par for the course, given that Trump is looking for somebody to pay for the rest of his campaign. Might as well be her, I guess. Yet the campaign has thus far stiffed the arbitrator, not the lawyers, but the arbitrator assigned to mediate the case, according to a letter sent to the parties in the case. If Trump's attorneys don't pay the outstanding bill by next week, and of course we're into that point already, the case could be tossed out. I wonder if there's an update on that. The dispute over Manigault Newman's book is far from the only legal thread left dangling for the Trump campaign. We'll examine some of those after this brief break. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday. But our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Netroots Radio. We continue on with the reading of this Politico piece on the many legal cases that the campaign has started up and let dwindle at this point, and we may find that his lawsuit against Omarosa might fall by the wayside and be dismissed by arbitrators for failure to pay the actual arbitrator in this case, which is as good a way out of a case as any, I suppose, if you are just a habitual litigator and you got a big mouth and you start cases that you can't actually finish, and it would be foolish for you to try to finish. We left off by saying that this dispute was far from the only legal thread left dangling for the Trump campaign, and during the break I searched around to see if there was any news about the case being tossed out, since the deadline for paying the arbitrator was looming at the time of the writing. No news about that. This is the latest on that case. Anyway, the campaign is helping fight accusations that Trump harassed and sexually assaulted women, because that's what campaigns do, I guess. It's helping keep documents about his business deals hidden. Other cases are proactive, such as attempts to enforce non-disclosure agreements and to punish media companies that the campaign accuses of defamation. And it is responding to lawsuits from people who say they were assaulted at Trump events, including one from a Missouri man who claimed he was arrested after laughing at a MAGA rally, which I didn't even know was a crime. Taken together, the cases reflect the legal morass the Trump campaign will face, win or lose, after November 3rd. Even if he loses the election, very little actually ends once Trump leaves the White House in January 2021, said Bradley Moss, a Washington lawyer whose firm represented former White House aide Cliff Sims, who was the target of a Trump campaign suit for violating a non-disclosure agreement when he published his own White House memoir. We all read that one, right? Litigation Trump has personally brought under his own name. I kind of misread that. I see. Litigation that he has brought. It was like litigation Trump. Like President Trump, he's one guy, but litigation Trump is another one. Okay, litigation Trump has personally brought under his own name or through the campaign, whether it be protecting his tax returns or suing Omarosa, two very important ends, will continue for however long there is money to pay the lawyers, Moss added. I guess he wasn't really thinking about paying the arbitrators. That's a new twist. The Trump campaign and its attorney, Charles Harder, known for representing wrestler Hulk Hogan in his sex tape lawsuit against Gawker, did not respond to questions about the Manigault Newman case and the unpaid bill. It's not the first time that Trump, a businessman with a global real estate footprint, maybe, and his campaign have faced accusations that they didn't pay the bills. Private contractors, bartenders, painters, real estate brokers, and others have all claimed that Trump didn't adequately compensate them for their work before he was sworn into office. More recently, Trump has been accused of failing to pay local officials who provide thousands of dollars in security assistance to the president's campaign during rallies. The Trump campaign's financial outlook is also faltering in the election's final weeks. Trump has fallen behind Biden on fundraising. In August, Democrats for the first time outraised Republicans by a staggering $154 million, eroding the president's longstanding cash-on-hand advantage. The pattern repeated itself in September when Biden raised $383 million to Trump's $247.8 million. The Manigault-Newman standoff stretches back to 2018 when the Trump campaign initially filed its arbitration case, considered a cheaper and quicker alternative to a lawsuit when attempting to resolve a dispute, according to attorneys. But in the October 14th letter, the American Arbitration Association said the campaign had yet to pay its $51,940 deposit, a required upfront payment to cover the arbitrator's costs. They actually asked for payment up front and didn't get it. Okay. At least they were smart enough to ask for that and didn't get too far into things. Note that if the matter of unpaid deposits is not resolved by October 29th, that's today, October 29th, 2020, the arbitrator will be asked to determine whether this proceeding should be suspended, the letter states. John Phillips, a lawyer who represents Manigault-Newman, confirmed Monday that he received a copy of the letter, which suggests Manigault-Newman could pay the costs to the association if she wanted to keep the case active. Why? Okay, the Trump campaign has refused to show damages with any particularity until recently, saying they want Omarosa Manigault-Newman to pay for campaign ads, which directly seems to violate many elections laws, he said in a statement. Now the campaign is causing more legal expenses and time spent because they won't pay their bill for their arbitration. We privately and publicly ask they dismiss these frivolous claims and pay our clients legal fees. Manigault-Newman left the White House in December of 2017 after a short, tumultuous tenure in which she served as the administration's highest-profile liaison to the African-American community. The White House said Manigault-Newman was fired, but she claims to have resigned. Jumping back a paragraph there, I guess maybe that might be why Omarosa might contemplate paying the arbitration fees to keep the case alive, to see if she can get the arbitrator to issue a binding order that would purportedly force the Trump campaign, if they're the ones filing the suit, to pay her attorney's fees and all this. But seems like a pretty big gamble because I don't see why the Trump campaign would accept an order from the arbitrator at all, even if they paid them. I don't think they would accept that order. So seems like a bit of a long shot. Anyway, after leaving the administration, Manigault-Newman said she refused to sign the White House's non-disclosure agreement. She did acknowledge signing one for Trump's 2016 campaign and another in 2003 when she was on The Apprentice. Those NDAs have been described as more restrictive than the White House agreement. A copy of a Trump campaign NDA previously obtained by Politico included a non-disparagement clause that prohibited staffers from releasing confidential or detrimental information about Trump, his business, or his family members. It's unclear whether the Trump campaign has previously paid any money to the arbitrator in the Manigault-Newman case. According to Federal Election Commission records, the Trump campaign did pay the American Arbitration Association $43,400 in 2019, but the record does not specify whether that amount is part of the outstanding fee or even part of the Manigault-Newman case at all. In its September FEC filings, the campaign did not list any debts to the Arbitrator Association. The association declined to comment, saying its cases are confidential. Already, the Trump campaign has spent millions of dollars on completed legal work, including helping defend Trump against allegations he worked with Russia to interfere in the 2016 election, and on his impeachment trial, during which he was accused of pressuring Ukraine's president to investigate Biden and his son Hunter. Remember that? Yeah. The campaign has also teamed up with the Republican National Committee on more than 40 lawsuits challenging voting rules in states across the country. There's only 50 states, so that's a lot of cases. An RNC official said the official Republican Party is not involved in any of the non-voting cases. We anticipate most of these will be moot after the election, although a few may not be, and we will continue to litigate as necessary, the official said. Separately, the campaign faces an ongoing federal investigation into whether it violated campaign finance laws in 2016 when it paid hush money to women alleging affairs with Trump. They're not going to be shutting down in 2, 6, 8 months, said Joe Birkenstock, who previously served as chief counsel to the Democratic National Committee of the Trump campaign. Think of it in terms of years. And that's the end of the article. That was an awkwardly constructed sentence at the end, but what he's saying is they're not going to be shutting down anytime soon, meaning the Trump campaign's legal lawsuits. Think of it in terms of years. So they've entangled themselves in cases that are going nowhere for many years to come, even as they are running out of money and verging on bankruptcy. Fantastic. Who could ask for more? He could drop out or, like I said, fall down a well, but, well, you know, we're not likely to get that. Okay, let's see. Other stories that might require inclusion in our roundup. Let's see. One of them is seems important, but it looks like there's not a whole lot of information developed there yet. But again, in the interest of getting the story out there on the record in case it blows up and you're left unawares, this, I think, relatively short piece from NBC News dated October 15th that we didn't touch on. Trump rally VIP among 6 Chinese nationals charged with drug money laundering. Wow, money laundering. An Instagram page belonging to Tao Liu features several photos of him at a September 2018 Trump rally in Wheeler, West Virginia. Presumably no relation to Jesse Liu, the former D.C. U.S. attorney. Just one of those very common Chinese surnames. And who knows, maybe it's not even a surname, and we might have those names backwards as we do with so many other Asian names and when we treat them in Americanized news. All right, who knows? Tom Winter is the reporter to blame in case the names are backwards. A Chinese national whose Instagram page features pictures of him wearing a VIP pass at a 2018 rally for President Donald Trump is now on U.S. soil after being charged with conspiring to distribute cocaine, and laundering the illicit funds, according to court documents filed earlier this week. Tao Liu, whose alias is Anthony Liu, is in the custody of the Alexandria, Virginia Sheriff's Office, where he will be held pending his initial appearance likely sometime next week. That would, of course, been, I guess, this week? Or the week past? I guess so. Losing track of my dates here. And so, yeah, maybe we could look for an update on this one. Liu is one of 6 Chinese nationals charged in a conspiracy that allegedly netted at least $30 million from 2008 to late last month and involved funneling illicit drug money, there's no really good drug money, I guess, to Latin American traffickers, the indictment says. They're the guys with the cocaine, so that makes some sense. Federal prosecutors allege that the men, in part, laundered their drug proceeds by purchasing products in the U.S. and shipping them to China. The products were then sold through black market merchants in China, the indictment says, with the money sent back to drug traffickers in Latin America, often Mexicans. It just says that in quotes, often Mexicans, through Chinese currency. No wonder they're actually being prosecuted under this regime. The effort, the indictment says, required special care and skill in money laundering. Oh, that's good. He's got a skill. Liu was also charged with trying to bribe 2 men who turned out to be undercover Drug Enforcement Administration agents, bad idea, in order to get fraudulent passports. An Instagram page belonging to Liu features several photos of him at a September 2018 Trump rally in Wheeler, West Virginia. What a rally to go to. I wonder how he got there. The Instagram page includes numerous photos from the rally, as well as an image of a red USA hat with a signature that appears to be the president's. He got a personally signed hat out of the deal. Thanks for the gift from Mr. President Trump, reads a post that accompanies the photo. NBC News found no records indicating that Liu donated to the Trump campaign, and it would be illegal for Liu, as a foreign national, to donate money to a political campaign. And he doesn't want to do anything illegal. I mean, you don't want to do any illegal acts like that to call attention to your drug deals and money laundering, right? Okay, but thanks for pointing out it would be illegal. Neither the White House nor the Trump campaign responded to requests for comment, but they did ask for some cocaine if there was any lying around. Liu, who was taken into custody in Alexandria, Virginia, could not be reached. It was not immediately clear if he had hired a lawyer. The other 5 men were identified in court documents as, oh boy, ready? Shizi Li, I'm guessing. I forget again how to pronounce the X's in anglicized Chinese. Jianxing Chen, Jingyan Li, Eric Yang Wu, Jiayu Chen. Okay, and there was no and in there, so they just did it all with commas and gave me no warning on that one. The men were all born in China but now reside in New York, California, and several Latin American countries, according to the indictment. No word on how they find themselves in West Virginia for this rally, though. I'm very curious about that. Federal prosecutors allege that Shizi Li, who went by the aliases Juan Li, maybe he was one of the guys living in a Latin American country, Juan Li, and had a WeChat name of JL007, Juan Li, I guess, 007, and I'm a spy and whatever. And this is great. I love when serious news stories refer to your online personalities and your online names. I mean, one day, of course, that could happen to me, and I get the goofy Kagro X name on there. It's no dumber or less dumb than these other ones. Anyway, JL007 and also Super King 99. Sounds pretty awesome. Anyway, Juan Li had those WeChat names, and he developed close ties with drug traffickers and cartels in Mexico, Colombia, Guatemala, and elsewhere to obtain contracts to move drug proceeds for the dealers. The other 5 men are accused of working with Shizi Li to help launder the drug money in a scheme that began in 2008 and lasted up until late last month, the indictment says. Shizi Li allegedly had bank accounts with BBVA Compass. I don't know. Somehow it looked like Compass to me, like Speed Pass or Easy Pass or something. Anyway, BBVA Compass in Miami, Florida, which he used as part of the conspiracy. And honestly, if you need a U.S. bank account for your cocaine transactions and money laundering, I would go outside of Miami, quite honestly, just to throw people off the scent. Like maybe Wheeler, West Virginia would be a great place to do it. Not Wheeling, it says Wheeler. In a 2018 DEA seizure application for BBVA accounts in Tennessee, investigators told the court that in the course of investigating a local drug gang, they determined that the cocaine in the greater Memphis area was being supplied by the Sinaloa. Well, I thought it was Sinaloa, right? But it's maybe misspelled here in this NBC News thing, unless I've been mispronouncing it the whole time. But right, Sinaloa, I thought, cartel. And the money laundering efforts for those transactions were allegedly directed by Shizi Li. BBVA Compass declined to comment. I would too. The indictment also says that Li owned and operated a casino in Guatemala City, Guatemala, which he used to launder money and provided him a place to meet drug traffickers. Meet me in Guatemala City, they always say. All right, let's see. Oh, here's another photo of him giving the thumbs up in his stupid USA hat. Honestly, it looks like it's a green screen thing. But allegedly, this actually happens at a rally. Liu, the other guy, is accused of trying to fraudulently obtain passports for multiple people in April. He allegedly struck a deal with undercover agents who told him they knew someone at the State Department who could illegally provide passports at a cost of $150,000 each. It's Pompeo. Okay. The indictment says that Liu agreed to deposit about $5,000 in cryptocurrency and $5,000 in cash into what turned out to be a DEA-controlled account in order to start the process of getting the passports. Liu was also hit with a separate money laundering case for allegedly moving some of the funds for the bribes through cryptocurrency. He attended several events in New York City and the surrounding area with Trump associate Joe Cinque. Wow, it's been a long time since we heard about party boy Joe Cinque. Goodness. The Star Diamond Awards for the American Hospitality Association, or Association of Hospitality Science, or whatever stupid name he had. Wow. And alleged mobster, so this fits. So he was hanging out with Joe Cinque, according to press reports and social media posts. Cinque presented him with an award when Liu held a kickoff for his investment company called Blue Water Capital. Little about Blue Water Capital, purportedly located at 1 Rockefeller Plaza, is publicly known. He had the 6-star Diamond Award for the most luxurious cocaine laundering facilities, I guess. A website for the firm is now defunct. There is no listing at 1 Rockefeller Plaza for Liu's company, and at least one firm that Liu touted as a business connection in a company video says they've never heard of the man. Cinque did not respond to a request for comment, but he had a lot of cocaine and a lot of cryptocurrency, I guess. Wow. Well, that's very exciting. I'm glad we read it because it's been a long time since we heard anything from Joey No Socks. Good times. All right, how about one more story more or less at random that I've been holding on to, mostly for the nugget with which Natasha Bertrand tweeted the thing around the other day, which is not the gist of the entirety of the story. The story comes under the somewhat more boring headline of Biden would revamp fraying intel community. That's good news, and it's important news, but it's a little bit boring compared to your usual Trump fare. But don't worry, there's a terrible Trump anecdote buried, not even buried, it's right up at the top. So all the good stuff comes at the top here, and then the important stuff after that. But maybe that's a good way to close things out for the day. We'll see how much of it we can get through. Intelligence has become a political weapon under Trump. We know about that. And the Democratic nominee's advisors say that would, of course, change. President Donald Trump, this is the good stuff, was in the middle of receiving a highly classified briefing on Afghanistan at his New Jersey golf club when he suddenly craved a malted milkshake. Does anyone want a malt? He asked the senior defense and intelligence officials gathered around him, an august group that included the head of the CIA's Special Activities Center, which is responsible for covert operations and paramilitary operations. We have the best malts. You have to try them, Trump insisted as he beckoned a waiter into the room where code word classified intelligence was being discussed. But who cares, right? The malt episode, which took place a few months after Trump took office in 2017, became legendary inside the CIA, said three former officials. It was seen as an early harbinger of Trump's disinterest in intelligence, which would later be borne out by the new president's notorious resistance to reading his classified daily briefings, known as the PDBs, and his impatience with the briefers, current and former officials said. But what initially seemed like mere boredom, which demoralized intelligence officials, but could be potentially managed by including pictures and charts in briefings to hold the president's attention, later morphed into something the officials saw as more sinister, an interest in wielding intelligence as a political cudgel. Whether selectively declassified by spy chiefs he installed for their loyalty, or obscured from congressional and public scrutiny if it conflicted with his preferred narrative, intelligence became just another weapon of the president's arsenal. Trump's actions and the endless partisan battles over the Russia probe and impeachment have left the intelligence community bruised and battered. Former Vice President Joe Biden's advisors and allies in Congress are already thinking about what a heavy lift it will be to restore morale inside the agencies, legitimacy on Capitol Hill, and public trust in the intelligence community's leadership should Biden defeat Trump in November, according to more than a dozen people close to the candidate. This will be among the most important things that President Biden would need to do, and that he'll want to do immediately, said Tony Blinken, who served as Deputy Secretary of State and Deputy National Security Advisor under Barack Obama and is a top advisor to the Biden campaign. I know from several conversations with him about this that he has a deep concern about what has been done to the IC these last several years in terms of the politicization, and repairing that starts at the top with the president. Blinken recalled Biden telling him in February of 2017, shortly after leaving office, that the thing he missed most about being vice president was receiving the PDB every morning. He said he felt so connected to what was going on around the world thanks to the PDB, and that losing that connection felt like a real void, Blinken said. I think this is evidence of the basic value he placed on the work of the intelligence community, because the PDB is, of course, their most important product. Jared Kushner steals it and sells it to people. You know. One approach Biden is considering, others said, placing people in charge who are experienced and who are already familiar faces to the intelligence community and its oversight bodies. It's not exactly genius, but okay. It's worth mentioning. There's precedent for holding over senior national security officials from one administration to the next. George Tenet, for instance, served as CIA director under both Bill Clinton and George W. Bush, while Bob Gates became Obama's defense secretary after several years with Bush. But there appears to be little appetite for that kind of bipartisan gesture now. When Director of National Intelligence John Ratcliffe canceled in-person election security briefings for lawmakers over the summer, Biden accused the Trump administration of hoping Russian President Vladimir Putin would once more boost Trump's candidacy. That is not how democracy works, Biden said at the time, but it is how American national security and sovereignty are violated. I think there's plenty of reason not to hold Ratcliffe over, obviously. A couple of people at the office of the DNI would have to go, absolutely, said former CIA and NSA Director General Michael Hayden, referring to Trump's stocking the office with loyalists like Ratcliffe over the last few months. The former Texas lawmaker's scant intelligence experience, fewer than 2 years on the House Intelligence Committee, was among the issues that scuttled his confirmation prospects when he was first nominated by Trump last year. Probably Gina Haspel would have to go too, Hayden said. Haspel, a career intelligence official who became the agency's first female director in May of 2018, has rankled some current and former officials by at times appearing overly willing to appease the president. She has clamped down on the flow of Russian intelligence to Trump, who is known to erupt in anger whenever confronted with news of Moscow's malign activities in the U.S., and stood and clapped for his State of the Union address earlier this year, a move out of step with past directors' efforts to appear apolitical. Gina is a good woman, but she would have to go, Hayden said. Not my favorite source of information on things like this, by the way. The Biden campaign has been considering a couple of veteran national security hands who could serve in a senior intelligence role in a Biden administration and hit the ground running to repair what they see as the damage Trump has done to the IC over the last 4 years. Among the names is former acting CIA Director Michael Morrell, former Obama National Security Advisor and close Biden confidant Tom Donilon, former Obama Deputy National Security Advisor Avril Haines, former Deputy NSA Director Chris Inglis, and former Deputy Director of the Defense Intelligence Agency Robert Cardillo. There is no question that Biden and his team will have an urgent task in restoring faith, trust, confidence, and morale in the intelligence community, said former NSA General Counsel Glenn Gerstel, who retired earlier this year. It's going to have to be a huge effort. He added that a Biden administration will need to pull off a revolution in how the IC thinks about and responds to a changing world, complex transnational threats like climate change and pandemics, following that reduced focus on the war on terror and the onrush of new technologies. That transformation, which should have occurred in earnest years ago, has to be accelerated under Biden, Gerstel said, or else we will be so far behind China we won't ever be able to catch up. With ODNI having 4 directors and being so distracted, we almost blew 4 years at a time when every moment counts. Trump's prevailing attitude toward the IC, current and former officials said, has been that he knows better, and that the agencies therefore need to be constrained to better align with his priorities. He also has repeatedly made clear his distrust of the intelligence community, from comparing them to Nazis before he was even inaugurated, to discarding their analysis of the Russia 2016 election interference in favor of Vladimir Putin's denials. He often uses quotation marks around the word intelligence in his tweets to signal his disdain, and he has been reckless with classified information, from revealing highly sensitive secrets about ISIS to the Russians in the Oval Office to tweeting out sensitive images of Iran taken by one of the U.S.'s most advanced spy satellites. He's not a very smart guy, and he obviously has no idea how to deal with the intelligence community. The rest of the article, mostly giving hints, dropping names, people inserting themselves into the mix in the hopes of being seen as contenders for top jobs in the Biden administration. Kind of a Washington parlor game, really, but it makes the article interesting all by itself just for that. And I guess let's just toss a few more things into the mix here. I happen to notice the name of Elizabeth Newman coming up here, whose name we've called before, noting for many of us Biden's demeanor in and of itself is like the healing balm we all need, but then goes on to say, we don't want to get into a tit for tat with the Biden administration just focusing on vengeance. Oh, really? Okay. Well, anyway, this comes again from Newman, who has endorsed Biden, but it will be really important to acknowledge that there has been a brain drain of good, competent, and qualified intelligence leaders under this administration, and these people should be given an opportunity to come back into government. I would watch them closely if I were you. We'll have to keep an eye on them in the future.
From networksradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Alexander Vindman also making an appearance in this article, just in case you were wondering where his name might be. We'll continue on. I don't know whether we're going to be able to get a Friday show recorded or not. You'll find out tomorrow, of course. In the meantime, stay tuned for Justice Putnam, who never fails you. He'll be on next with the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we'll certainly be back next week.